Hopefully you're not too deep into your siestas. So I'm on the academic side of things. So instead of being super bombastic and having really pretty slides, I'm going to be fairly paced and have academic slides. And I'm used to students falling asleep in my lectures. So A, I'm not offended. It's that time of day. B, I'm just going to start with the punchline and then give a little biohackery example of the kind of things that I study and why I think it's important for the biohacker community. So the work that I do fundamentally is looking at uncovering biological rhythms. And I've got an example here at the top of the slide in blue. That's temperature taken from my wrist using a little thermocron eye button. And each line is a different day. So these are 5 consecutive days overlaid. You've got time of day at the bottom there, and you've got temperature in Celsius on the y-axis. And one of the things that you could notice is that there's an arc across the day, so that's your circadian rhythm. And there's also these ripples within the day. And these are much less well studied, and this is the thing that excites me. These are called Altradian rhythms. Because we haven't had the technology to measure the same person over and over and over and over and over again across the day, we haven't been able to study these things until now, until we've had better tech. So the whole point of this talk for me is there's a lot of us here doing augmentations, taking supplements, measuring things in ourselves, looking at blood work. And the only punchline I want you to get before you fall asleep is when you do that really, really matters. So the timing is extremely important for the context of whatever it is you're doing because your body is moving in time. So I'll show you an example of how that matters. This is me, and this was a colleague of mine who was, we did this in parallel with each other. So he's wearing one of these little thermal trackers, but he's not on a good schedule. I was living in the hills, I was raising chickens, I was being very old man relaxed. And in red, David was running all over, desperately under deadline pressure. And so the interesting thing you can see is that he still has roughly the same amount of wiggliness, but now all those lines don't fall on top of each other as well, right? And it's pretty obvious, I think, if you just stare at them, you can tell these are two very different people, right? The top looks very orderly, the bottom is very disordered. And the bottom, this lack of good temporal synchrony, is a sign of ill health. And if that stacks up across your life, just like jet lag, just like shift work, it makes you much more likely to get early Alzheimer's, cancer, osteoporosis, obesity and diabetes, heart attacks, all of these things that accumulate that eventually kill you. One more point, though, right? Not only do these timescales exist within your body, but if you think about the normal way that you would do a blood test, these two people look exactly the same. So if we just take all these data and make them into a normal distribution, now he's the little red box and I'm the little blue box. This is like if you had a reference range, right? I go to the doctor, they take my temperature, they go, yeah, your temperature is roughly human. That's good. You don't want your temperature not to be human. But you can use your eyeballs, right? And again, you can very clearly see the guy in red is disrupted, the guy in blue looks super orderly. But if you didn't know when you were taking that measurement, if you couldn't tell where you were in those rhythms, you couldn't tell them apart. And so it's very important to get that continuous data to see that context. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about wearing my academic hat. What are these rhythms? Where do they come from? And then I'll show you an example of playing with it in a biohackery way that I did to myself as part of some research. So these rhythms are baked in, right? They're cellular processes. And we talk a lot about, this is a figure I borrowed from a review, because I think it does a very nice job of illustrating the point that we have clocks in our brains, and that's why blue light tells us it's the daytime and sets our clocks, and so we wear the blue light blocking glasses. But it's not just that. It's actually every single cell in your body has these genetic clockwork. So the figures off to the side are these genes that feed into each other. Gene A promotes gene B, which goes back and shuts down gene A, and so you get this flywheel. That's a clock. Every cell in your body is doing that, which means that when you're thinking about health, you're not just thinking about what's my one clock doing, what's my brain clock doing. You're really thinking about orchestration. How do I keep all of these clocks in line with each other so that they can anticipate what it is that they need to do? So that when your liver needs to clear toxins, it's lined up with you going to sleep to let it do that, for example. So here I'm showing there's genes in the liver, where the yellow is high expression, the blue is low expression, each row is a gene. And what you can see is that for lots and lots of genes in all of these tissues, in the heart, in the lungs, in the pancreas, and of course in every organ, the gene expression is highly regulated as a function of the time of day, which is why you see these two arcs in each of those plots. The resolution on this plot, though, is every 4 hours. So they have 6 time points for every day, whereas those ripples of temperature that I was showing you are more like 90 minutes. And what that means is that when we do a traditional study of a few measurements across the day, lumping together individuals, we lose that higher frequency information. And so again, it's very hard to study, it's very expensive to study through traditional means, but by taking advantage of wearable technology, it actually becomes really easy. And so my job becomes fairly trivial of just saying, what are new sensors? How can we slap them on people? Hey, look, not surprisingly, new rhythms shook out. What are those rhythms telling us? How is that useful to our lives? So I'm just going to give you one example. It's an example that I've heard people talk about today. It has to do with timed fasting. When are you eating? So friends of mine, Armin Garabans and Todd Coleman, who is Todd in the purple shirt, is a professor of bioengineering at UCSD, where I'm just joining the faculty. So I'm excited that he gets to be more, we get to be more intimately involved now. They invented this device called Electrogastrogram. Works the same way that an EKG works, measuring electrical potential from your heart, but they optimized all of the cleaning up of that signal so that it would pull out information from your stomach, from your intestines, so electrogastrogram, EGG. And we were sitting around, and I said, well, that's really cool. Have you guys looked at a 24-hour rhythm yet? Do you know what kinds of rhythms shake out? And they said, no, we were just doing acute patient care. I said, cool, let's do it. So you get noisy stuff like this, and this is a spectrogram. So we've got frequency along the Y, we've got 24 hours along the X. And what you can notice is that around 0.05, so most of the way down, 0.05 hertz, once every 20 seconds, there's this red band. And that's actually the rate at which your stomach is contracting. Once every 20 seconds, your stomach sort of gives a squish. So we can extract that band, and you get something like this. This is 2 different electrodes from the device. In this case, it was Armin, wearing it for 24 hours. And all of a sudden, really cool stuff shook out of this, right? Stuff that nobody had ever seen before. So we've got these 3 big peaks at the beginning, and then we've got a little flat area, and then we've got 3 longer peaks, and that's sleep and wake. Nobody had a clue that the stomach had these rhythms in it. It's fun of having new technology. The green lines are when Armin ate a meal, had a snack that day. What I thought was really exciting about this was, if you look at especially the red channel, if you look at those green lines, he eats a meal, his stomach has to deal with it, but the red is actually coming up before he eats the meal. Right? So in fact, as the stomach is getting active, producing ghrelins, they're going to the brain, they're promoting hunger, we're able to monitor that process so that somebody could get feedback on their phone eventually, once this is smoothed out a little bit, and say, is it a good time to eat? Is my stomach processing things? Should I be getting going? So that was super cool. The other thing we can see is from actigraphy that was sleep. That first half with the 3 humps, his stomach is having sleep cycles. Nobody had ever seen that before. I think that's super cool, right? So most of sleep, we study it from EEGs. You're looking at brain waves. But of course, your body also sleeps. Nobody studies that to first order. It's very poorly explored, partly because we haven't had the right tools. We haven't had the right tech. So this is a great example of, right away, really cool findings, like your stomach has sleep cycles that mimic deep sleep. Super cool. So I said, well, this is really fun. We got this new toy. I'd like to explore how much behavioral choice affects this kind of rhythm. So I got some off-the-shelf electronics. I bought some of these eye buttons for temperature, taped one to my wrist, taped one to my armpit. So I'm getting trunk temperature, which is analogous to core in some ways. And then I'm getting distal temperature. And I got a Freestyle Libra, so continuous glucose monitor. Slapped it on my arm, get continuous glucose. And I just lived 2 weeks. So the top is a roster plot. You've got 7 days on top of each other, time of day, and the little tick marks are when did I eat a meal. And you can tell from this that I'm roughly diurnal, right? I tend to eat in the middle of the day-ish, and it's not very structured. And then I took a week where I regimented it. I said, okay, I'm going to eat the exact same time every day. And so you can see that second block, I'm compliant with my own experiments, so I'm good at this, and I eat at the right times every day. And I said, let's look at what happens to these data. So I'll start with glucose, because regulating glucose is something a lot of people in this room are interested in, I think. So this is a heat map now. So the whiter, hotter it is, the higher my blood glucose is. The bluer, the lower it is. And again, without any fancy statistics, right away, just by looking at this, you can tell, by scheduling my meals, I let my body know what was going on, what was coming, and it gets much better at regulating my blood glucose. So yes, they follow my meal, but the duration gets very tight, right? I don't have these long lags of glucose. And the last day is the really fun day. So if we look at that bottom row, I'll walk to this side so I'm not blocking it. You notice that there's these white columns, right? And the first and the third column continue all the way down to the last day, even though that last day I didn't eat anything, I was fasting. The little blip at the end is when I finally break my fast and I ate a piece of pie and my blood glucose goes way up. But my body was actually anticipating when I was going to have a meal, and it was altering my blood glucose in accordance with that anticipated schedule. So again, because I had let my body, all these different body clocks, I'd let them get lined up, I let them know what was coming, they were able to respond much more precisely. And I've been doing this now with a number of other patients that are pre-diabetic, and you see the same thing, that the glucose comes down, the pre-diabetes gets controlled, and what you eat matters, exercise matters. When you eat is at least as powerful as those things. So thinking about hacking time is really cool. I wanted to look at the relationships, though. So I said, okay, well, glucose got into line, but maybe that's just my meals. Maybe I'm making it up that my whole body got organized. So I wanted to compare these two signals. So again, we've got these 2 weeks. We've got the week before, where I just eat whenever I want, week after, which is very orderly, and I made up a little dashboard, because why not? So this is the size of the dot in these 3 different corners is how rhythmic either axial temperature, distal temperature, or blood glucose is. And then the thickness and the blueness of the bands that connect those dots is how much co-information they shared. So that is to say, if one was changing rhythmically, would that have let me know what the others were doing? And so what you can see from this week before is that you really can't tell much. It's pretty red, the lines are pretty thin. So not only am I not regulating my blood glucose, but my blood flow to my arm, my blood flow to my trunk that are controlling my temperature, they're not really doing a good job of syncing up to each other. We're looking at 2 different time scales here, the 24-hour time on the outside, and then the faster rhythm on the inside, this ultradian rhythm. But look what happens when all I do is I change when I eat. Right? I get this massive buildup of coherence. So now not only am I more rhythmic in both time scales, but I'm more organized. So when my temperature in my wrist changes, all of a sudden that's giving me very good information about what was my blood glucose doing. Right? So I've become synchronized as an orchestra, and that's how your body is healthy, is when you don't have friction between your organs because they know what each other are doing, they're lined up with each other. And you can help that happen by letting them know what's going on, having a sleep routine, having meal routines. The last piece, again, is this day of fasting, not taking any input at all, not analyzing the 24-hour scale because it's too short of a time. But that ultradian rhythmicity and that coherence really remains, right? The size of each ripple has gone down, so those dots are small, because they're not getting a kick from a meal. But they've stayed lined up. So once you get lined up, you have this momentum where your system wants to stay lined up. So I thought that was a fun little hack to do. And I've done this with a number of other subjects, and these effects hold. But the point is, eventually you could just be looking at these things in real time on your phone and saying, is the stuff that I'm doing, happening at the right time? Am I hitting, maybe I want to hit the peak or the trough of those ultradian rhythms? And is it helping me? Do I look like I'm more organized as a body? Or am I optimizing one variable, but maybe that's at the cost of other variables that I couldn't see? So that synchrony, I think, is a cool thing to get biofeedback about and explore. So since I am an academic, I'm going to take a liberty of just pontificating for 1 second. And you all have to bear with me, so I apologize. I just want to say, thank you for including me in this group. I don't think there's a ton of academics that get to hang out with the biohackers, and I love it. And I think biohacking is actually how we're going to do science in the future. As in more and more individuals generate data, we won't have to take people into labs and do weird arcane tests to them. we'll get communities sharing data about what real life looks like, and that's how we'll actually learn how to help each other more. And I use these three examples here, the Dalai Lama, Batman, and Iron Man, as examples of the idea that I think the public is actually very receptive to biohacking. It's viewed maybe a little bit as a niche culture, but actually I think the public has made very clear they have these aspirations. Biohackers are people who are educated, they're people that have means, and they've put discipline and time into either honing their bodies, honing their minds, but they're not just doing it for themselves, right? The Dalai Lama isn't just happy. Batman isn't just ripped. They're doing this because they want to affect change for the good in the people around them. And so I just want to say that's what motivates me as an academic, discovering things that help people. I think the kinds of discoveries you guys do are amazing, and they're not mainstream enough that very many people know about them. And so I just want to remind you, you have this potential to share these learnings and do a lot of good for a lot of people that can take these things into their own lives. And I'll just end by saying we're not alone in that these are partners that have helped me with this project or tangentially related projects. And I'm going to call out Oura Ring, which, full disclosure, I consult with them. But I do that because they're the best hardware that I've found for this. Anything that lets you get these nice continuous data is great, but companies that take an attitude of sharing data, of wanting to empower their users to explore, I think that's a really important attitude. And I know there's a lot of people founding companies here, so I'm just going to, again, from the academic bench, make the pitch that you don't have to say, I'm going to do all this and I'm going to own your health and I'm going to sell it back to you. There really is the opportunity to make a stable business by being open, by sharing data, and by encouraging people to democratize biohacking much more widely than it currently is. So thank you. That's my spiel. And it looks like I have 7.5 minutes if we're doing questions, although I don't know if that's actually a thing. I don't know if there's a mic that's going around, but if anybody has circadian biology questions or anything like that. My wearable on my wrist is just my cuff. I don't have a wearable on my wrist. I'm wearing the Oura Ring. Usually I've got a bunch of stuff taped to my body, and this time I decided not to do it. I've been traveling a bit, and I'm tired of it. One of the nice things about the Oura Ring is that when I used to use the eye buttons, I had to tape them onto myself. Now, I did it for 2 years. And obviously, you start getting pretty bad rashes and things like that. So it's lovely. One of the things that brought me into Biohacker community was it's lovely to see what's the tech that's coming that's going to make that kind of guinea pigging easier, right? Oura Ring is much less painful for getting my continuous temperature data. Oh, good question. He asked, what was I eating during that experiment? So I cook. I love to cook. So it was mostly organic, and it was not a regimented thing. It was a vegetable, and I was weighing it. So it was the same mass every day. But other than that, it would be something like a bunch of dark leafy greens like we were hearing about earlier, some meat, and then probably a handful of nuts or something like that. So just sort of small meals across the day. Nothing super fancy, nothing super challenging. Yeah. This is a great question. So she asks, the regularity is important. I say yes. And she said, do we know anything about how tight to make that window when you're doing timed fasting every day? You can definitely push it too far. So we've seen people I've seen people gathering data looking at continuous glucose who get competitive about it, right? And I can eat 4 hours. And generally what happens is they start to dysregulate their own glucose as a result. 8 hours, 12 hours seems to be fine. I think the main point is not so much that you're making it as small as possible. It's that a major part of going to sleep is letting your body take care of things that it can't take care of when you're awake. So your liver, for example, changes to dealing with toxins rather than processing food and keeping you going. And if you don't get out of the way and let it do that, it can't do its job as well. So if you're eating late at night, you're stopping your body from clearing you out, which means every day you're building up waste you didn't deal with. And of course, then you have more inflammation and you're less healthy. So I don't think you need to go extreme at making it small. I think you just want to be routine about having a good sleep routine and letting your body know every day it's going to come at roughly the same time. So that's when you have your opportunity to go into maintenance mode. Yeah, so he asks, with this EGG, can we distinguish any organs? And I have to give full credit to the other researchers here, Armin and Todd. But yeah, no, it's very cool. You can map out where is there blockage for people that have bowel disruptions, it looks like, because it's all signal, right? So basically you now have this sort of abdominal radar You can wear it continuously, and you can say, here's nice and smooth and rhythmic, and here things get all tight and weird, right? And so you can actually, for surgery, this was one of the experiments we did, can you figure out where somebody has the inflammation that needs to be excised during, for example, a colonectomy? And it seems to be the case that, yeah, you definitely can. You can look at when people have dysrhythmias in their stomach, so they're having trouble keeping food down or they're having heartburn, you can directly monitor that. It's pretty exciting. What are the top 3 takeaways from my research that might be useful? And then actually, like the litmus test of how honestly do I in fact do those. Number 1 is routines, right? My body has all these different timescales it's trying to regulate. So for those of you scoring at home, right, you have Altradian rhythms, daily rhythms, women have ovarian rhythms, and then we all have seasonal rhythms. So sort of 4 major timescales that we know about. There's others, but they're less regular or they're less well studied. So trying to let those things happen, right? Letting myself sleep a little longer and put on a little bit of weight in the winter rather than pretend that I can live at perpetual summer, right? Trying to make sure that I'm asleep when it's dark. So that's number 1, routines. I'd say number 2 is not eating too much, especially refined foods or sugar, right? That when you're giving your body complexity, it's able to do much more with that than when you're giving it refined sugars, right? Flour was invented for pioneers. It keeps. You bleach it and you can put it on your covered wagon. And so humans can live as they walk from Kansas all the way to Oregon. But that has nothing to do with are they living well, right? It has to do with keeping them alive. So we're really good at keeping lots of people alive with grocery stores, but that's totally different than optimizing, right? So again, things we've been hearing today, right? Getting back to dark leafy greens, getting back to things that grew in soil that had complexity and challenge so that they make these bitter elements. That's definitely a thing. And then I guess, the third thing is celebrating what we don't know, right? One of the biggest things about being a researcher is by existing, I'm existence proof that there's more things we haven't figured out, right? I get to live on that frontier, and that's super fun. I think the importance of biohacking is that we don't know the first thing about what makes people really different from each other, right? When you talk to somebody about what is sleep, you say, well, there's sleep cycles. You go, you have deep sleep, and then you have more REM sleep at the end of the night. Okay, how much is good for me? What should that cycle length be for me as opposed to you? No clue, right? How does that change with seasonality, with drugs you're taking, with pregnancy, any of these normal things, right? With aging. Very, very little insight there. So until we have a culture that celebrates shared learning and shared experimentation, I don't think we're going to get there. So that's the thing that really, I'd say that the routine, the complexity, and the ignorance are the things that really fuel me. That there's so much out there that there's an opportunity to do better if we're willing to accept that we don't know, right? If we get away from, I've got this one thing that does it. Say, yeah, it's a very complex system. A lot of things have positive effects, but let's stay humble about it. Like, let's keep learning. The not yet available. I believe that Todd is pursuing a company. I actually don't know that. But that's the hope, certainly, is figuring out how to get that kind of technology through the clinic and into user devices. And I would say that's true for all kinds of sensors, right? So the code and the guts of the thing are available online, so you can look up the paper. And maybe you can build one with an Arduino and make that available. All right, my time is up, so thank you, everybody.